Welcome to Basta Stories, your gateway to the most chilling real-life horrors lurking across America. These stories weren't written by horror authors. They were lived. If you think your town is safe, think again. So, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely, because the scariest thing is knowing that every word you're about to hear actually happened.
I used to believe the city went to sleep after midnight. That fear lived in other people's houses, and I was just the one who knocked, took the report, and left it behind. I only learned that night that fear can follow you home even when your uniform stays on a hanger. 10 years is a long time to drive the same streets in Jeffersonville, Indiana, to memorize where porch lights fail, where alleyways hold their breath, where routine feels like armor. I wore that armor the way I once wore a brace on my knee after the torn ACL that ended the only dream I had before this one. Football taught me discipline, angles, patience. Police work taught me that patience turns into erosion when no one is watching. By the summer of 2016, the erosion had reached the bone. We had a name at briefing: Robert Harrington, medium build, dark hair, a black sedan that never idled in the same place twice. His robberies in the Clarksville area didn't make headlines so much as leave small wakes. Shaken clerks, missing cash, a camera that found the wrong corner. He slips just before backup, someone said. I heard it as praise directed at the wrong man. The night I found him, or he found me. I was near East 10th Street, a familiar strip of pavement I could have traced blindfolded. The cruiser's interior felt like a second skeleton. Radio at my shoulder. Spotlight ready. The scent of stale coffee in every seam. A black sedan moved ahead of me in a way that suggested indecision without ever slowing enough to prove it. When my presence reached him through a rearview mirror, indecision flipped into refusal. He accelerated. I braked my own impatience and lit him up. He stopped. I parked behind him, ran through the mental checklist that keeps a person from becoming a tribute, and stepped into the kind of air that knows secrets. Up close. The driver's tension vibrated through the glass. License and registration are small requests that become large when names don't match stories. His ID made the request enormous. Robert Harrington. I didn't recite his description. I remembered it the way you remember the face of the first person who hurt you. His hand gripped the wheel. I asked him out of the car. He said I had the wrong man. I said I had the right one. When I reached for the radio to call for backup, the decision he'd deferred arrived in full. The sedan lunged forward into the dark, and everything I had learned about angles, and patience was suddenly moving at the speed of a bad idea. I reached the cruiser, engine already symbol and promise, and the chase became the only conversation either of us understood. There are roads that exist for the living, and roads that belong to the things we don't talk about. That night, East 10th led me from one into the other. He drew me away from the arteries of Jeffersonville into a side street that felt like a sentence missing a verb. The map in my head told me we were approaching Walnut Ridge Cemetery, a place with iron gates and tall trees that throw their own shadows back at themselves. Dead end ahead. The phrase doesn't mean what you think when the dead are on both sides of the fence. He slipped around the final bend. I expected tail lights. I got a blank scripture of asphalt. I slowed to a crawl. Let the spotlight carve its pale circle across bushes and fencing. Told dispatch where my faith went when I chased a black car into nowhere. Backup was minutes out. Minutes are long in places that confuse silence with permission. I parked, stepped out, drew my weapon, felt the air thin in my throat the way it did on the last play I ever ran. The gates kept their own counsel. A set of headlights brushed the road, and for a breath, I thought he'd doubled back. I signaled, aimed, called out commands. I have used 1,000 times with the voice of a man who needs them to work one more time. A couple looked back at me, faces wide and startled. They had no story to match mine. They were just trying to get home. I apologized with the economy of someone who understands he has to keep moving. They left behind a streak of normalcy on a night that had none. The spotlight found a second black car tucked behind overgrown brush, the kind of half-hidden shape that tells you you've already lost the element of surprise. The driver's door sat slightly open, an invitation or a trap. I didn't think of heroics. I thought of policy, of angles, of the way my hands felt steadier when they were busy. The fence welcomed me with cold iron. Beyond it, the cemetery ranged out in rows that might as well have been an audience. I advanced the way you do when you know you're being watched and don't want to find out from which direction. Dispatch said backup was close. Distance is cruel when measured in heartbeats. Graveyards are a census of people who can't answer back. The living were the ones I feared answering me in the dark. Headstones rose like an alphabet of endings. My beam washed over names that meant everything to someone and nothing to me, then slid between monuments where shadow behaved as if it had instructions. Movement to the left. A figure in dark clothing, slipping between stones with the patience of a locksmith. Another shape. Another. The brain tells you to assign numbers because numbers seem smaller than danger. I counted 3 before my light caught a 4th face I already knew from a photo taped to a briefing room wall. Harrington. Thoughts simplify under certain thresholds. 4 against 1. Minutes before backup. Weapon in my hand. Rules I can't afford to misquote. A voice ordered me to drop the gun. There are moments when training is surrender in the best sense. I placed the weapon on the ground because I wanted to be alive when help arrived. Hands closed on my arms. The earth came up through my knees. Cold, soaked fabric. Wet grass pushed its scent into my memory, the way trauma brands a date. I could hear them conferring in low, efficient tones. Not a rush, not a panic. Just men who believed the night belonged to them. One of them shifted behind me, and the iron taste of the fence line and the damp smell of limestone told me exactly where I was and how small a person can feel inside a uniform that fits perfectly. I tried to keep my breathing even. To treat fear as a number, I could divide until it lost its teeth. They debated outcomes as if reading a menu. Run. Bind. Remove the radio. Wait. I found myself thinking about my high school coach and the way he taught us to hold still at the line of scrimmage, to see more by moving less. It felt obscene to borrow anything from that field for this one, but the body grabs what it needs. The mind bargains with the dark by offering small promises. Stay calm. Stay present. Stay ready to stand when a voice gives you permission. Footsteps approached from beyond the graves. More than one. Moving with purpose. My captors shifted. For a narrowing moment, I believed additional men had arrived to settle the question of whether the night would end with a headline. Then, the color I had been waiting for spilled across stone. Red and blue, ragged by tree limbs, followed by commands that snapped hierarchy back into place. I didn't look away from the ground until bodies collided in the kind of motion that has nothing to do with sport and everything to do with timing. Officers swept the rows the way storm fronts sweep fields. Hands left my arms. A familiar voice told me to hold still. Plastic tightened over wrists that weren't mine. Those minutes that had been an ocean finally granted me shore. When they stood me up, my legs argued with the idea. I gathered myself by staring at the nearest name carved into granite and borrowing steadiness from a stranger's dates. One of the uniforms, rookie energy, but steady eyes, asked if I was hurt. I told him no, because it was easier than inventorying a list I didn't want to start. While evidence teams worked, The story formed with the inevitability of a tide. An old mausoleum used as a cache. Goods tucked inside the empty spaces families hadn't visited in years. Even open graves used as temporary hiding places. The ugliness of that felt larger than theft. It felt like trespass with intent to erase. I told myself to focus on reports, chain of custody, the practical grammar of aftermath. But the graveyard had learned my name, and I had learned its voice. I stood there and understood that my routine had never been armor. It had been a lullaby, and I had finally woken up in the middle of it. There is a weight to a statement that ink cannot capture. The hand writes it, but the body absorbs it. Back at the station, the fluorescents did what lights do, pretended that brightness equals safety. The report wrote itself in neutral sentences that disrespected the scale of what had happened. I pursued. He fled. I located the vehicle. I entered the cemetery. I encountered 4 male suspects, including Robert Harrington. I complied with a verbal command under imminent threat. Backup arrived. Arrests executed. Evidence recovered. Every line was accurate and incomplete. I signed where I was told and returned to my locker. The metal door reflecting a man who looked like me and didn't feel like me at all. In the days that followed, the adrenaline invoice came due. Sleep frayed. My appetite outsourced itself to habit. I drove East 10th Street on muscle memory and saw the curve at the end of the dark road, as if the sedan were still ahead of me and the decision still pending. During a routine traffic stop 2 weeks later, the driver's hands shook. Mine did too. And that was new. People think fear is a spike. Sometimes it is a tide that looks like normal from a distance. At a family birthday, I barely attended. My mother asked me if I was all right. I said work was work and changed the subject to the cake. In the locker room, a veteran told a story about a night in another cemetery in another town. He finished with a joke that made the room relax. I couldn't make the joke land in my own mouth. The thought recurred with stubborn regularity. I had done everything right by the book, and I still ended up on my knees in a place meant for names under stone. There are papers you sign that end a job. There are decisions you make that end a version of yourself. I typed the letter with a steadiness I had not felt in weeks. The language was polite in the way departures require. Gratitude for the trust placed in me. Respect for the department. Acknowledgement of the privilege of service. None of it was untrue, but between each line sat the image of a slightly open driver's door near a fence that keeps nothing out, of men conferring about my future like it was theirs to allocate. Of red and blue, relieving a burden I had agreed to carry, and suddenly could not. My supervisor read the letter in silence and asked if I was sure. I told him yes, with a voice that had finally chosen a side. He nodded and did the quiet math of scheduling and staffing in his head. I emptied my locker the way people empty houses after a move, decisive. Then suddenly slow when the smallest object insists on being a symbol. The badge and the nameplate went into the envelope last, out in the parking lot. The air felt ordinary again, but ordinary had been permanently edited. I drove past Walnut Ridge Cemetery on my way home because people touch the bruise to prove it's still there. The gates kept their counsel. The trees leaned over their rows like ushers who have learned that grief arrives on time. I parked a block away and sat with the engine off. And in that quiet, I finally admitted what the night had written across me. The line between routine and chaos had never been a line on the ground. It was a threshold inside my chest, and I had crossed it without moving an inch. The first thing I remember is the way the house refused to breathe once my parents left, as if the air itself went rigid and waited for me to fail. I was 17, a junior at Jefferson High in Bloomington, Minnesota, and the week had sharpened every feeling into something metallic. Finals did that, turned routine into tunnels, stretched afternoons into corridors where every step echoed. My parents packed the SUV for my cousin Kevin's wedding in Mankato, and I tried to arrange my face into the expression my mother needed. Capable. Fine on my own. Not the kind of girl who panics at night. She hugged me and told me to call if anything felt wrong. That sentence, simple as a porch light, stayed on in my mind long after their tail lights dissolved down the street. At 6:00 p.m., the house closed around me. It was a small 2-story place on a quiet block. The kind of home where you can point without thinking to every nick on the banister and remember the summer it happened. I locked the door, set my backpack on the dining table, told myself that quiet was what I needed to study for history. It should have been an advantage, but silence has grades. There's the kind that steadies your pulse, and the kind that makes every habit you didn't know you had sound like evidence. The second hand crawled across the living room clock. The refrigerator sent a low vibration through the floorboards. Without the murmured choreography of my parents' routine, the hallway steps, the cabinet doors, the muted television, the house became a series of rooms connected by sightings of my own reflection in glass. Focus on the exam. I put on a show to crowd the edges of my attention. Anything to muffle the thought that the quiet felt watchful. After an hour, I reached for something human. Melissa. We shared the same history teacher and the same dread. I asked if she could come over and stay. Study. Keep the house from becoming a mirror that only returned me. She texted back that she'd be here by 9. And like that, the corridor of the evening brightened. She arrived with a stack of notes and her easy voice, and the living room remembered how to be a living room. We spread chapters and flashcards and highlighters over the coffee table until the whole surface looked like a map of obligations. For a while, the only thing that mattered was which reconstruction plan would be on the short answer, and whether we should outline the causes or the consequences first. It was almost 10 when Melissa stood and said she'd use the bathroom upstairs in my room, the one with the fresh towels and the mirror my mother never let accumulate a single streak. I told her to go ahead, grateful to feel normal enough to make that kind of small suggestion. 2 minutes is long enough to relocate the center of your body to your throat. Melissa came back downstairs wearing a face I didn't recognize on her. Color drained, movements careful. A person stepping to avoid an invisible spill. She said she saw someone sitting outside in one of the deck chairs, not moving, not a trick of angle. A person. Her certainty did something to the room. It didn't tilt. Exactly. It tightened. I wanted to veto it. I wanted the word shadow to be a solvent that erased the rest. Instead, I told her we'd check together. We killed the downstairs lights so the glass wouldn't betray us. Then climbed the stairs and eased into my room. I parted the curtains just enough to stitch my view to the porch light symmeted circle. The deck looked like a stage set the night crew forgot to strike. Table, 2 chairs, the rim of a planter that never got the basil it was promised. The chair Melissa named sat there with the rectangular innocence of furniture. Empty. No figure. No shift of clothing. Only the gleam of damp wood that caught the porch light and returned it. My heart accelerated anyway, as if Melissa's first report had planted a metronome inside my ribs. I asked her to tell me exactly what she saw. Twice. Then a third time, without meaning to. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't try to make it cinematic. A person, she said, sitting, head turned a little away. Her hands trembled when she pressed her palms along her jeans. I told her tired eyes turn corners into faces. I told her the yard had ways of composing itself into figures when the light is wrong. I wanted those sentences to sound like pillars, and she wanted them, too. We stood until the window fogged in two oval patches where our breath reached the glass, and we rejoined the world of chapter outlines almost gratefully. She fell asleep in my room sometime after midnight. Our books slumped in a pile like a costume change midway through a play. In the morning, sunlight made the deck look like proof that fear is just a trick you play on yourself when it's late. We laughed at it, not because it was funny, but because the laughter reduced it by half. She went home, and my day collapsed back into study schedules and half-remembered dates. I moved through the hours as if they were beads to count, certain that by evening I'd be the kind of tired that doesn't leave room for invention. For a while, the house cooperated. Rain can erase outlines or harden them by Saturday night. The storm made steady work of the roof and the siding and the fence that never stopped needing repairs. Melissa texted to say she couldn't come. Her dad had a minor procedure, and she needed to watch her younger siblings. Fine, I wrote. I'll be okay. The sentence felt like a passphrase to myself. I tried to study. The margins of my notes grew mossy with reminders. The clock advanced with the patience of someone who knows you're not going anywhere. Around 10, I heard the kind of sound I wanted to rename. Not a squeak, not a creak. Those words belong to cartoons and jump scares, but a measured drag, as if weight had settled and shifted on wood. The deck. I stood, turned off the lamps one by one so the glass would show me what was outside instead of my reflection, and went upstairs. I pulled the curtain until there was barely a slit. The porch light, dulled by rain, lifted a thin plane of luminosity across the deck. In that plane sat a shape that registered as a person the way a single letter can unlock a whole word. He was in the same chair Melissa had described, body angled slightly, head tipped, as though listening to something only he could hear. The rain stitched a border around him. I didn't see his face. I saw the fact of him. Every muscle arranged itself around a single instruction: do not move. I felt the phone in my hand before I thought to reach for it, my thumb finding the side button by memory. Parent, police, neighbor. Any name would do if it delivered a voice that wasn't mine. As the screen lit, he turned his head, not all the way, just enough that if I'd allowed myself one more inch of curtain, I would have found out whether he was looking at me. I didn't take that inch. Time shifted shape. The next minute held every minute I'd lived in this house. The porch light threw its tired circle. The rain gave the deck the sheen of a sealed letter. The chair held a man who didn't belong to us, but belonged. In that second, entirely to the space we maintained. I could feel my pulse in the hinge of my jaw, and the phone felt heavier than a phone should. Call. Call now. I nearly did. When a different sound arrived, 3 articulate impacts at the front door. Forceful, official, like punctuation that refused to be ignored, and a voice called out, announcing law enforcement. A second voice followed, one I knew, the neighbor my mother trusted with a spare key, Mrs. Carlson, a woman who paid attention to the world from her attic window like it was her lineage. The instruction shifted. Go downstairs. Make it real. When someone names what you've seen, the floor steadies under you. Through the peephole, the reflective strip of a uniform. The familiar outline of Mrs. Carlson beside him. Chin set in the stubborn angle of people who do not allow themselves to be wrong when danger is possible. I opened the door. Words became the bridge between us. Her telling me she had been sorting boxes in the attic when she glanced through the small window that overlooks our yard. Him confirming the patrol car had already rolled by as she called. She said she saw a man sitting in the chair on the deck. Not a shape that could be mistaken for a garden tool, and not a figment clinging to bad light. A man. They searched the perimeter. The officer's flashlight traced the margins of the deck, the step down to the yard, the damp edges near the fence line. Nothing. The chair was only a chair again, bright with water. No prints preserved in the slats, no trail compressed into the soil that would let you draw a line from presence to absence. The officer was calm and careful, the way people learn to be when they know their authority is borrowed from the trust of others. He suggested I stay somewhere else for the night, with my parents gone. The proposition landed less like a suggestion than a verdict you willingly accept. Mrs. Carlson had already begun making a list. Toothbrush, phone charger, pajamas, something to read. The anxiety medication my doctor had prescribed after midterms last year, in a dose low enough to feel like a secret. In my kitchen, the house resumed, pretending it was the same house from this afternoon. I moved through rooms and zipped my bag while the officer jotted details that would become a pocket-sized version of this night in a report no one would read twice. We returned to the back door together, and I looked at the chair. The rain beaded into tiny constellations across the seat. The porch light made a thin halo of the table's rim. The view exerted a gravity that made it hard to turn away, as if staring at the place where he had been would undo the fact of his leaving. I closed the door gently and followed them out. Safety and sleep are not synonyms at Mrs. Carlson's. The guest room smelled like cedar and laundry soap. And the bedspread had the kind of geometric pattern grandkids choose when they remarry a room for their grandparents. She made me tea in a mug printed with violets, set it on the bedside table, and left with a promise she would keep the hallway light on. The house had the soft noises of a house that has been well used and well kept for years. The kind of place that makes you think of birthdays and casseroles and every small kindness that ever made it into a plastic container. I lay down and watched the light along the baseboard. The scene from my window replayed at a speed my mind could not control. He sat. He turned his head. A fraction. A hinge in slow motion. The storm kept writing and rewriting the story of the street outside. Do not invent what you didn't see. My body didn't believe instruction. Each time I closed my eyes, I opened them again halfway, as though I owed the room proof that I was still in it. At some point, past midnight, I got up and pressed my fingers against the window screen, as if texture could anchor me. This room looked onto the side yard, not my house, but the effect was the same. Lawn, fence, the absence of a person where a person might be. The tea cooled, the light along the floor thinned and thickened when clouds moved. In the morning, my head felt packed with a version of cotton that remembered everything it had absorbed. Mrs. Carlson made toast and asked whether I wanted her to call my parents. I told her no. They would be home Monday, and I wanted to be the kind of daughter who handles Saturdays. She squeezed my hand anyway. I thanked her more times than help requires. Back in my own kitchen that afternoon, I wiped the counters and made a study schedule with boxes I could color in, as if completion moved me closer to invulnerability. The deck, seen through the glass, made a rectangle of sky and wood. I avoided meeting straight on. Nothing happened to me. And it still happened to me. My parents came home on Monday with leftover cake and family news and the satisfied tiredness of people who have fulfilled their duties. I listened, and I told them the story the way you tell a doctor your symptoms. Clear, sequential, refusing to dramatize, insisting on the single fact that won't stop pointing at itself. They believed me because they know me. My mother said the sentence she had left me with: call if anything feels wrong. She meant it in the present tense now, not as an emergency protocol, but as a method of living in a house the world can touch. That night, I stood at my bedroom window and looked at the deck as if it were a photograph of a person I once knew in a version of my life where names changed and faces didn't. The chair sat soaked from a new, smaller rain. I thought about how long a person can sit without moving. A test of will. A dare to endurance. A way to learn the map of someone else's home. The porch light is not a shield. The curtains are not armor. The phone is not a guarantee of arrival. You are allowed to be afraid when nothing touches you. I turned away and slept for the first time since Thursday. Though I woke once with my heart hammering and put my hand on the wall to feel the house hold me up. I wish I could tell you that my fear turned into a story I outgrew. It didn't. It became a kind of lens the world passed through. I never spent another night alone in that house. College came, and different walls, and a roommate whose laughter made rooms remember why they were built. But whenever I visit home now, I walk past the back door and glance at the chair. Rain or sun, summer or late fall. I see the space he once took and the space that remains. The fear did not break me. It taught me where I end and where the world begins. It taught me that being watched is not a metaphor when the watcher chooses you. And it taught me that sometimes the scariest nights are the ones that do not end in disaster, because they leave you with the knowledge of how close disaster can stand without crossing the threshold. The kind of night that stains your memory doesn't begin with a shattered lock or a masked face. It begins with something smaller. A cheap neon vacancy sign refusing to die. A room stripped to essentials. The sharp bite of bleach that won't let you forget what this bed has seen. I left Cleveland with a deal that felt like it had been negotiated out of my bones, and promised myself I'd make Indianapolis by morning. I told myself to keep going. I told myself to be practical. I told myself that one exit later I would stop. The roadside motel promised nothing more than a door that locked and a mattress that didn't argue. Low building, horizontal as a held breath, paint the color of old ice, and the vacancy sign stuttering on and off as if quarreling with the dark inside the office. A sleepy clerk slid a key card toward me with the indifference of someone who counts life in shifts, not seasons. A rack of brochures advertised places I didn't want to visit. A coffee urn had surrendered hours ago. Room 112 smelled like it had been scrubbed of an unwelcome history. The medicinal sting along the bathroom mirror. The distant ghost of old cigarettes pressed into the carpet. The television caught my reflection before it caught a channel. I tossed my suit jacket over a chair where it hung like a flag of surrender. I changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants and felt tension unspool, jaw, neck, shoulders, hands. My phone lit up with follow-ups from my boss, subject lines armored in urgency I couldn't absorb. I set the phone face down. Outside. The lot was a chalkboard map of tired cars. Years of travel had given me habits I didn't need to rehearse. Notice the door. Notice the window. Notice your breath. The AC unit made a steady climate out of stale air and sold it as control. I brushed my teeth, longer than necessary, just to fill time with a ritual that made sense. Then sat on the edge of the bed and let the springs confess their age. I locked the door and checked it again. I drew the curtains and checked them again. Fatigue sanded my edges, while the mind kept tracing the shape of worry. Cleveland replayed. Faces across the table. The way sleep deprivation makes you say yes when you mean not yet. When I finally began to float, the night decided it had other plans. The scream wasn't theatrical. It arrived without courtesy and erased the distance I thought I had from other people's disasters. Words followed. Wrenched. Certain. A woman somewhere close. Insisting her husband had been attacked. In business. Clarity pays. In life. Clarity sometimes asks you to put your hand on a precarious door handle and turn. I split the difference. I slid the chain so the opening would be as wide as caution, and cracked the door. Corridor air met me like water in an aquarium. Recycled. Cool. Faintly chemical. 3 doors down. A woman stood in a bathrobe the color of watered milk, hair unkempt, eyes too bright, the skin beneath them raw with salt. "Please," she said, "he's not moving." That sentence belongs to the category that pulls you forward while every instinct says retreat. She told me a motel worker had tricked them into opening the door and forced his way inside. She said there was a blow and then a silence. The details tumbled the way fear collapses time. Pause, observe, decide. I stepped into the corridor and shut the door behind me, aware of the unfamiliar weight of acting outside any routine. The carpet held the damp of 100 summers. My bare feet registered the chill and stored the detail in a new private dictionary for this night. She led me with a twitchy choreography of urgency, looking back too often, as if she might outrun her own narrative by walking faster. Her door opened to a room that could have been mine in another shuffle of chance. Bed in disarray. Suitcase unzipped and refusing to contain itself. Lamp at an angle as if the night had shoved it. On the floor, a man lay on his side, expression flattened beyond reading, skin slack. I am not a physician, but I recognize the few positions that demand attention. "Call for help," I said. She repeated the instruction with shaking hands, and the room became a waiting room with no magazines, no clock. She kept explaining about a worker with a mop earlier, about a knock, about a missing part that needed fixing, about plausibility offered like a key. I knelt a few feet away, careful not to disturb anything that might later be considered evidence. The bathroom light threw its pallor across the tile, and the smell of bleach advanced like a thesis, clean as alibi, sterile as denial. In the hallway, footsteps collected, the building's routine transformed. Radios, questions in flat, professional voices, the trained cadence of people who cut fog for a living. Uniforms, the manager, clipboards, key cards, the part of the night where your own voice must be measured. Hold your place. Answer only what you know. The manager had the posture of someone who has spent a lifetime apologizing for outcomes he didn't cause. He gathered who he could. 2 housekeepers startled out of a late shift, a maintenance worker with permanently stained hands, the front desk clerk blinking under hallway light. The woman repeated her claim with steady insistence. The attacker was a worker from here, a familiar face, someone she had seen with a mop earlier, someone who had used that familiarity to force a door. An officer asked the question that should have been simple. How did he open a locked door from the hallway? The woman's eyes moved, as if the answer might be printed on the wall. She said he mentioned a repair. She said he might have had a key. She said many things in the tone of someone who needs them believed. Memory rearranges itself to support survival. Under stress, we create islands that look like certainty. The manager's face organized into confusion, then hardened into the expression of someone who has run out of apologies. "These are all my staff," he said quietly. "No one else is here." The woman scanned the faces and shook her head, rising from fear into indignation. The air changed temperature. You can feel it when a room stops accepting a story and starts cross-examining it. An officer said they would review the cameras. The woman urged them to search the grounds immediately, insisted the attacker could be escaping, insisted time was the enemy. She paced, hands suspended mid-gesture, bathrobe no longer clothing, but a flag of chaos. This is where the ordinary world splits. One path is the one you want. A mistake, a misunderstanding, an intruder fleeing into the night, a recovery choreographed by trained hands. The other path leads to a truth that has been present the whole time, waiting for the courage to be seen. I realized I was doing what I do in conference rooms, scanning for tells, cross-referencing statements, listening for the sentence that gives away the game. Negotiation teaches you to hear the difference between fear and performance. But in a motel hallway with a man on the floor, clever is irrelevant. Useful is the only category that matters. I gave my statement as a chain of facts. I heard a woman call for help. She claimed her husband was attacked. I entered. I saw him on the floor. I described only what I had seen and did not decorate it with conclusions. When the officers moved toward the office to review the CCTV, the woman's agitation rose by a quiet degree you couldn't miss. She oscillated between urgency and direction, pleading and command. The corridor lengthened. Dread can stretch distance and time until minutes feel like a small lifetime you must walk through step by measured step. Breathe, observe, do not invent. Let the facts assemble themselves. The camera room smelled like warm plastic and stale coffee. The manager unlocked the door with a key that had scratched his name into the metal tag through repetition. Monitors stacked in a grid turned the property into patient rectangles waiting to be read. An officer scrolled back through the evening like a fisherman pulling line through hard water. Steady. Exact. The woman leaned toward the doorway, urging the officers not to waste time, urging them to search now. What they saw then, what I learned after, fitted the night to a cruel hinge. Early evening, the couple crossing the lot, the woman pausing as if mapping camera angles, the man lifting a bag from the trunk. Later, the woman alone, altered by a mask, moving with a deliberateness that does not belong to fear. She traced the edge of the parking lot like someone learning a pattern, paused near a lens, and corrected her path to skirt its cone of vision. She returned to the room, and a few minutes later, she emerged screaming. No maintenance worker with a mop, no polite knock from a stranger, no invisible key. The story had only 3 characters: the man on the floor, the woman constructing a narrative in real time, and the camera that never grows tired. The officers' faces took on that stillness of people who know exactly what they must do next, and exactly what it will cost the person they're about to confront. The arrest was not theatrical. It was procedural language, a request for hands, a sequence that belongs to a script you hope never to hear read aloud in your presence. Inside the room, paramedics worked with careful speed. Some nights refuse every bargain. The bedside lamp cast an oval of warmth that felt obscene against the flat fact on the floor. I stayed in the hallway, granting distance to a tragedy that was not mine to inhabit. Under fluorescent light, the motel's age showed through its makeup. Patched drywall, carpet seams meeting like healed scars, the shadow where a picture had once hung. I thought of Cleveland and the exactness of our synonyms for control, options, contingencies, leverage, and how language can fail when the opposite of a story sits preserved in pixels. When a story breaks, it does not shatter loudly. It unthreads. What remains are small strands you can't reweave into anything that resembles the original claim. I don't keep score with fate, but there are nights that feel like you've been allowed to leave a theater where the play ended badly. The officers cleared me to return to my room and asked if I planned to stay. I looked at the bed that had promised rest and felt the promise fall through. I packed with the efficiency of a muscle memory. Charger, wallet, keys, suit back over my shoulder. Notebook slid into the bag. The clerk stared past me like someone who wouldn't remember my face an hour later and would be right not to try. I signed nothing. I said little. I left. The vacancy sign was still arguing with the dark as I merged onto the road. The world reduced to the two white lines and the narrow ribbon between them where safety lives. My hands fixed themselves at 10 and 2, as if I were taking a test. The radio stayed off. Silence was the only music that didn't impose commentary on what had happened. 15 miles, 20, 30, a rest area, a vending machine casting a dim halo, a bottle of water for a body that had forgotten thirst. Back in the car, I let the mind do what it does after shock. Reorganize. This is where the trance loop begins, without permission. You replay the door, the face, the claim, the blankness of the body, the sentence, "He's not moving." You retell it in different words, as if phrasing could change outcome. I heard a call. I saw him. I summoned help. The police arrived. The cameras spoke. The story changed. You can't change a story by editing it. You can only participate in what comes next. The drive south felt longer than the map promised. Every headlight in the rear view became a vehicle to monitor. Every car exiting became a narrative to discard. I wondered why she had chosen that particular story. Why a worker? Why a mop? Why that detail, as if cleanliness could sanitize violence? There are lies that sound familiar enough to masquerade as shared memory. Cameras do not share memory. They accumulate it. By the time the sky lightened into the color of a promise you should not trust, I had written a new rule for my life on the road. Do not stay where your mind will be forced to live after your body leaves. I had treated motels as neutral boxes on a map, anonymous spaces where time paused. Now I knew better. Some rooms collect residue the way mirrors hold steam. You can wipe the glass and see your face again, but fog returns if the air is still. Choose rooms that don't fog you in. I never looked up the case. I'd like to say it was respect for distance, or the system, or the boundary between what happened to me and what happened to them. It wasn't virtue. It was self-preservation. Some facts grow wild if you water them with attention. I let that fact shrink. The loop faded from constant hum to a machine in another room you eventually learn to stop hearing weeks later. In another cheap room, between one obligation and the next, I caught myself performing the ritual my body invented that night. Hand checks the lock. Eyes measure the stitch lines of the curtains. Mind chooses the bed for the cleanest exit path. Phone placed where fingers will find it in the first reach. Notice the door. Notice the window. Notice your breath. The mantra returned not as panic, but as measured practice. Anchoring, I've since learned, is what you build when you refuse to be ruled by what frightened you. I am not proud that when I pass a housekeeper's cart, some subterranean voice offers uncharitable summaries of strangers I've never met. I am not proud that when a clerk holds a key card, a watchful part of me tracks the angle of his wrist. Suspicion is not an identity. It is a tax. It takes. But I pay less of it now. The remainder I invest in rituals I can name. A run before I travel. A call after I arrive. A text with the room number to a friend. A rule against rooms with doors that don't feel like they belong to me. If this reads like a confession, it is one. I have stood in rooms where money was at stake and felt my voice leave because I believed someone else's script more than my own. That night in Ohio rebalanced something. I trusted my senses. I followed the facts until they aligned. I stepped away when I was no longer needed. I kept a promise I can live with. Never again treat a place that holds me for a night as if it deserves no scrutiny. In my memory, the neon doesn't flicker anymore. It holds steady, bright, unwavering, a warning that purifies rather than haunts. If I hear someone in a hallway, I will answer as before, with caution and with care. If I am presented with a story too convenient, I will wait for the witness that never tires. And when a night asks me to choose between speed and rest, bravado and mercy. I know the choice now. I pass through places that do not attach themselves to my future. I leave the rest to the cameras and the light. The loudest places can turn a person quiet, and sometimes quiet is where pain multiplies without anyone noticing. My name is Jonathan Martin, and years ago I thought the only measure that mattered was a 40-yard split and a coach's nod. I carried that belief from high school fields to Stanford, and then into the April afternoon of 2012 when the Miami Dolphins called my name. A new life began with a playbook thicker than any textbook and a culture I told myself I would learn like any other scheme. I am, and always have been, shy and introverted in a sport that celebrates volume and swagger. Shyness can look like weakness to the wrong eyes, an empty seat that invites the worst guest in the room to sit down at first. I met every player and every coach with a steady handshake and the hope that professionalism would be enough. The first week was routine. The second week pressed its thumb into my ribs. Tasks showed up dressed like tradition. Carry the veterans' bags. Cover the tab after team dinners. Show deference in places where deference has a price. I had done these things before as a freshman in high school and college. I told myself this was the same storm, just bigger clouds. Then the work changed shape. A joke stopped being a joke after the third repetition. A nickname stuck in a way that made my shoulders lock. Words that were supposed to bounce began to land and stay. 3 teammates made it their project to turn the volume up, where I kept mine down. Their names were Mike, John, and Richie. Their words slid into practice periods, meeting rooms, and meal times with a persistence I couldn't outrun. I was called soft. I was labeled strange. My education was folded into an insult, as if studying made my body less useful, as if intelligence removed my right to be here. The insults weren't just about me. They reached for history I hadn't offered them, for wounds I had acquired long before I wore an NFL jersey. Some of what was said carried the weight of race, the kind of weight that doesn't fall to the floor after it's thrown. The first time I tried to laugh it off, the sound felt borrowed from someone else's mouth. I thought that if I blended, if I shared the laugh, I might earn a smaller target. That belief lasted until the 10th week of training, when a message arrived that felt like a line I hadn't agreed to cross. The voicemail wasn't long, but it carried enough intent to fill a stadium. It named me in a way I didn't recognize as human. It promised violence and extended the threat to my family. People the sender had never met. People who had only ever celebrated each small step I took on this path. I replayed the words once, then again, as if repetition might turn them into something else. It didn't. I stood in the quiet of my room and tried to decide whether the right response was to confront, report, or absorb. I chose the option that looked most like survival in that moment. I said nothing. In the facility, silence is a second uniform. You put it on because speaking can be misread as disloyalty to the team, to the myth of toughness that floats in the air like chalk dust. I wore silence all day and all night. It did not keep me warm. Silence protected the wrong people while it asked me to disappear to make the room more comfortable. Practice continued. Footwork drills, anchor work, hand placement, hips square, inside leverage, muscle memory can carry you across bridges your mind is afraid to cross. Coaches corrected angles and pad level while I tried to keep my face composed enough not to invite new commentary in the training room. Taping and treatment offered the ordinary tenderness of athletic care, and even that tenderness felt conditional. A loan that could be recalled if I failed to perform the role of the acceptable teammate. When your nervous system is on alert long enough, everything begins to look like a test you are failing. I remember a late afternoon in the weight room when the music was background to the clank of plates. A teammate asked me a question about a set, and I answered with more detail than he expected, slipping into the exactness that school trained into me. He gave me a look that tried to turn curiosity into a liability. I learned to edit even my helpfulness. I learned to ration my voice between reps, between meetings, between meals. I rehearsed ways to not be noticed while doing a job that requires a body designed to be noticed. Anchoring myself to small routines, lacing my cleats the same way, folding my towel into precise squares, became a substitute for the stability I could not find in the room. There is a financial version of isolation where every receipt is a reminder that belonging has been mispriced. Early in the 2012 season, the demands shifted from words to money. It started with dinners that got bigger in ways the menu couldn't explain. Then came events that assumed I would fund them as a gesture of respect. One trip, a weekend in Las Vegas, carried a number I couldn't speak out loud without feeling something in me crack. 15,000. Expected with a smile. Expected even if I wasn't there. I told myself, rookies take their turns. I told myself, this was tradition. But traditions that require you to empty your wallet while emptying your dignity aren't traditions. They are tests designed to see how much of yourself you will sell to keep your seat at the table. The requests weren't evenly distributed. They found me with a precision that felt personal. Payment became its own ritual. Swipe the card. Pretend it doesn't hurt. Pretend this is investment and not extraction. Walking into the cafeteria began to feel like approaching a toll booth with no alternative route. Every interaction accrued a surcharge. I began to text my parents more than usual and then less than usual because I didn't want them to read what I wasn't saying. One night, I typed the truth. I hate it here. This atmosphere is like a prison. I erased the sentence and wrote it again, then sent it because I couldn't carry it alone. My parents called and urged me to report what was happening. The advice made sense in a world where justice moves quickly and reputation isn't a fragile object. Inside a locker room, built on a story about toughness and unspoken codes, reporting felt like walking into a storm without a coat and announcing that you feel cold. I told myself to keep my head down, to get through the season, to play my way into acceptance. The next day, the weight room smelled the way it always did. Rubber, metal, effort. None of that masked the feeling that the room itself had opinions about me. In meetings, my notes looked organized while my mind felt scattered. On the field, assignments that used to be math turned into noise. The mind can be trained to ignore a lot, but it pays interest on everything it suppresses. The interest was coming due. I sat at my locker more often, stretching time before and after practice so I could avoid certain corridors where certain voices gathered. I tried to make myself smaller in a body built for the opposite. The organization's culture had a reputation for hardness. That reputation lived in the air and on the walls. It lived in the way people greeted each other and in the way they looked away. I wanted to belong to a team. What I learned was that a team can be a country with laws that are never written down. And you can be tried under those laws without ever seeing the text. Pattern interruption arrived in small acts of kindness that didn't solve the problem, but kept me from vanishing. A staffer asked about my family and didn't turn the answer into a joke. A veteran from another position group nodded at me in a way that said he saw more than a body filling a jersey. These gestures did not flip the script. They reminded me I still had one. On some evenings, I drove without music, letting the road drain the day. On others, I parked, breathed deliberately, and wrote lines in a notebook about who I intended to be beyond the next meeting, beyond the next practice. embedded command for my future self: stay. Humiliation is not a single event. It is the echo of a moment that keeps repeating until something breaks. In October 2013, I walked into the cafeteria with the normal stomach of a lineman who had already lifted and practiced and was trying to make food into fuel, not comfort. I carried my tray to a table where Richie and others sat. The chairs were there. The men were there. I sat down. Then, as if someone had signaled a drill I hadn't learned, everyone stood up and walked away. It was not new as a prank in the league. It was not original, but it landed like a judge's gavel on a case I hadn't known was being heard. I looked at the empty chairs, at the space where my teammates had been, at the way the room carried on, as if absence were normal. Something in me shifted. The part that bargains chose to stop bargaining. I stood, left the cafeteria, and then walked out of the facility. I didn't come back. There are exits that feel dramatic. This one felt like air finally returning to a room, outside. The sun did its ordinary work, and ordinary felt foreign. My phone filled with messages. I didn't answer. I drove without planning a route and ended up in a place that smelled like detergent and fresh sheets. A place where the door could be locked from the inside, and someone would ask neutral questions designed to locate pain without sensationalizing it. I checked into a mental health facility because I needed help I couldn't give myself. Depression and anxiety were no longer shadows. They had names, prescriptions, and daily routines. The first night there, I lay awake and cataloged the ways I had taught myself to endure. I had mistaken endurance for strength because the culture around me rewarded one and misread the other. In group sessions, I spoke more words in an hour than I had spoken in a week in the facility I had left. I watched strangers tell truths that would have been counted as treason in a locker room and saw them rewarded with care instead of contempt. My parents became anchors in a sea I had pretended was a pool. Close friends listened without judgment. They told me to tell my story. The thought of speaking publicly made my chest tighten, but silence had failed to keep me safe. I made the choice to talk. When I did, the League listened in the way institutions do, through an investigation, through interviews, through a report that assembled facts in orderly paragraphs. The findings were clear about what had happened to me inside that building and around it. The names I had kept to myself appeared on paper. The outcomes followed their own logic. Richie was suspended for the remainder of the 2013 season and later released. The validation of being believed did not repair everything the experience had damaged. It did not rewrite the days I had endured. It did not restore the sleep I had traded for vigilance. It was, however, a line drawn in public where private lines had been crossed. Back in ordinary life, I learned that recovery is not a finish line, but a practice. Some mornings, I could put on that practice easily. Other mornings, I had to be talked into it by people who loved me enough to repeat themselves. Trance loop began as a daily routine. Breathe, write, move, eat, rest, repeat, breathe, write, move, eat, rest, repeat, breathe, write, move, eat, rest, repeat. The repetition kept my mind from negotiating itself into corners. Changing uniforms can change scenery, but the mind travels with you, no matter what logo is on the helmet. In 2014, I joined the San Francisco 49ers and played 15 games. That sentence reads like a passport stamp. It leaves out the part where confidence felt like a garment I couldn't quite zip. It leaves out the part where the field, once a place where assignments clicked in sequence, now asked for a focus that had to be rebuilt inch by inch. I carried isolation into a new building the way a person carries a scar, mostly invisible until the light catches it. I did my job. I showed up. I watched film. I lifted. I tried to be who I had been before. The distance between trying and being was not small. I studied defensive fronts with the exactness that once gave me comfort. I asked for feedback and applied it. I attempted to re-anchor the sport to the parts I loved, the geometry of a well-blocked run, the trust of 5 men moving as one, the quiet pride of a clean pocket off the field. I invested in therapy the way I had once invested in off-season strength cycles. I tracked triggers. I practiced redirecting spirals into questions I could actually answer. On better days, I could feel my chest loosen during practice, my mind track a stunt without jumping ahead to what might go wrong. On harder days, I felt like I was carrying a backpack full of wet clothing into every room. I did not always know which version of me would wake up. By 2015, the mental and emotional toll outgrew the strategies I had used to contain it. I retired. Writing that word, attached to myself, felt like placing an object on a table and backing away. Retirement did not erase the love I had for the game or the work I had put into it. It acknowledged a cost I was done paying. In the years that followed, I turned toward service of a different kind. In 2016 and 2017, I spoke about mental health awareness and anti-bullying because I wanted other people to have language for what had buried me until I couldn't breathe. I told rooms full of strangers the truth I had avoided telling myself. Asking for help is not an indictment. It is a form of intelligence. Life began to widen. Classrooms replaced stadiums. I studied finance and real estate and discovered that ambition can survive a change of address. In May 2024, I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with an MBA. I co-founded the Narrow Road Group, building something practical and forward-looking with people who valued dignity as much as outcome. Happiness returned in ways that surprised me. Slow mornings, honest conversations, work that did not require me to flinch when I walked into a room. None of that erased the past. Nothing does. There are experiences that move in like long-term tenants. You learn to live with them, to manage their demands, to require that they respect your house. The demons I carried from my NFL years did not vanish when I found new purpose. They grew quieter when I stopped feeding them secrecy. Anchoring the new life required repetition. Show up prepared. Answer emails. Study markets. Design projects with people who treat respect as a baseline and not a reward. Show up prepared. Answer emails. Study markets. The rhythm turned into a kind of strength I had once believed only existed between hash marks. If you are reading this and you recognize the shape of what hurt me in the outline of your own days, hear me clearly. Speak. Find someone who can hear you without turning your pain into entertainment or advice disguised as judgment. Tell a parent. Tell a friend. Tell a professional whose job it is to hold stories without dropping them. Silence protects the wrong people. It protects the person who wants you small, the culture that wants you obedient. The myth that tells you endurance is the same as strength. I believed all of that until the cost became unbearable. You do not have to wait that long. When I say you are not alone, I am not reaching for a slogan. I am giving you logistics. There are people who will answer the phone, who will show up, who will help you map a path you cannot currently see. And if you are someone who has power in a room, a coach, a captain, a supervisor, then your job is more than strategy and results. Your job includes building an environment where quiet does not become a hiding place for cruelty. Replace the wink and nod policies with clear rules. Replace the code of silence with a code of care. Replace the dare to tough it out with the courage to step in. The day I left the facility, the sky did not split open. No orchestra swelled. I just walked to my car, turned the key, and drove toward a life that would require maintenance and mercy. I am happier now. That is not a declaration of victory so much as a report from the field. The work continues. On some nights, I lie awake and revisit moments I would not choose again if I were given an hour to edit my past. On other nights, I sleep like a person who trusts the floor to hold. Both nights belong to me. If you are being bullied, say something. If you cannot say it out loud, write it and hand the page to someone you trust. If that person does not listen, hand it to another. Keep handing it over until you are met with care. Do not let anyone define your value with labels designed to make them comfortable. There is a path from this to something better. It may not be quick, it may not be clean, but it is real, and you are allowed to walk it at your own pace. When I think about the young man I was, the one who tried to become invisible at his own locker, I want to tell him this: your quiet is not the problem. The problem is a room that confuses compassion with weakness. Leave that room. Find another. Build one, if you have to, where the next person who walks in with your temperament is met with respect and not a test. That is how we change a culture that taught me to hold my breath until I forgot I was breathing. That is how we make sure the loudest place does not continue to turn the quietest people into targets. I am still here. So are you. And that is the beginning of the best kind of ending. Pattern interruption. For anyone listening who has a hand on a lever of influence, pause the ritual that harms. Replace it with a ritual that heals. Repeat until the room learns a new definition of strength. Coda. Practical steps. Real rooms. If you need a place to start, begin small. Identify one person who has proven themselves trustworthy with ordinary details. Share one sentence more than you shared yesterday. Write down what happened in simple language, as if you were recording the events of a practice. Who, what, when, where. Save the message. Send it, if you can. Document requests for money. Document the nicknames. Document the threats. Keep dates. Keep screenshots. Keep copies. If you are a leader, establish a channel where reports can be made without punishment and where outcomes are transparent. Measure your room, not by how loudly people speak, but by how safely the quiet ones can exist. And if you are already in a place that has failed you, step outside and inhale air that is not priced by someone else's approval. Then decide the next right thing and do it. Then decide the next and do it again. And if you are the person who has caused harm, there is work with your name on it. A real apology includes repair. A real change includes relinquishing the thrill you once got from making someone else small. Ask yourself, who taught you that dominance equals security, and who might benefit if you uninstall that lesson? Talk to someone trained to help you dismantle reflexes you have mistaken for personality. Accountability is not the end of your story. It is the only beginning that protects the people around you from the person you do not want to be anymore. The first thing that felt wrong about our new life in Queens wasn't the rent, or the cracked paint, or the alley view. It was the darkness that didn't know when to end. Javi and I had moved into an apartment that fit like a jacket 2 sizes too small. Boxes were stacked along the hallway, and every step drew a complaint from the floorboards that felt older than the building's lease. But that wasn't what pressed on my nerves at 2 in the morning. It was the way night claimed the room and refused to give it back. No overhead fixtures, no steady light to pull the corners into clarity. A single inherited floor lamp made a pale circle near the couch and surrendered after that, as if it had done its part and would do no more. I worked nights at a copy shop. It meant I lived in reverse, eyes bright while everyone else's narrowed. I paid bills after midnight, read the news in the hours when delivery trucks argued with one another on the avenues, tried to find my socks without turning the bedroom into a rummage sale. The darkness turned each ordinary task into a test. We needed a lamp that could expand the usable world beyond a single circle on the rug. Not a designer piece, just something strong, constant, unembarrassed about brightness. Minimum wage bruises your judgment. You start measuring dignity in kilowatts. So I did what everyone in the city does when need collides with budget. I opened Craigslist. I scrolled past lamps that seemed to apologize for themselves, all dented nostalgia and tarnished brass. And then I saw it, sleek metal neck, a subdued golden wash, a marble base with the confidence of a monument. The photo had that careless perfection you can't fake. Whoever bought it first cared. Whoever listed it now did not. $20. The username looked like an auto-generated shrug. Letters and numbers without intention. No ratings. No bio. Javi glanced over my shoulder, scratched his chin, then gave me the look people save for the moment before a decision they'll mock later. "We can skip it," he said. But rent had just emptied our accounts, and dignity still measured itself in kilowatts. I told him I'd pick it up after my shift, quick in and out, and I'd text him the second I parked. He didn't argue. He just said my name in a tone that meant be smarter than you feel. The seller wanted to meet near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Late afternoon. Easier for me, he said. The message was brisk, not rude, and the directions had that local shorthand that invites trust. Landmarks instead of exact addresses. The kind of hints you get from someone who has walked this block more times than you have. I told myself that people with bad intentions don't know the names of corner stores. By the time I turned off the expressway, the sky had dulled to a color I don't have a word for. Something between nickel and bruise. The streets near the yard stitched together industrial memory and present neglect. Warehouses with peeling letters, lots salted with rust. A dog nosed a leaking trash bag like it was a future it could still shape. I parked. The building the seller had named was brick, 3 stories. A fading sign that read, "Acme Tool and Die." A relic more than a promise. The windows above were either cracked or braced with plywood. I stood on the sidewalk and let the thought arrive. Walk away. Walk away now. Then I pictured our living room, learning how to be a room again. And I reached for the door. There are moments when the air tells you the truth before anyone speaks. Inside, a hallway leaned into its own dimness. I turned on my phone's flashlight and tried not to aim it like a weapon. "Hello?" I said, careful and steady. "I'm here for the lamp." The word lamp sounded absurd in my mouth, like naming a small kindness in a place built for tasks with torque. No answer. I considered putting $20 under the door frame and retreating. Then, footsteps pressed down on the stairs. Measured. No hurry. And a figure in a gray hoodie appeared at the top landing. The hood cast his face into a set of deepened shadows. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He lifted his chin toward the hallway, as if to say this way, then took the lead. My heartbeat climbed a ladder I couldn't see. I followed. Each step punctuated by the sparkle of broken glass in the light from my phone. The hallway pinched into a narrow space that might have been a supply closet when the building still remembered its purpose. Metal shelving, cardboard boxes that had traded their labels for dust. And on the floor, just as the ad had promised, stood the lamp. It was even better than the photo. No wobble to the neck. The metal catching what little light existed and turning it warmer. The marble base, a pale, confident circle. Something inside me unclenched. Relief is a dangerous editor. It deletes context and leaves a cleaner version of events you want to believe. I reached for my wallet. Producing a bill with a smile, I tried to sand into casual. "20 okay? Honestly, this is worth..." I didn't finish the sentence. A hard edge arrived at my temple and pulled the floor out from under me. The world didn't go black. It went distant. A room at the end of a hall I could see, but not enter. Cold concrete received my shoulder. My thoughts gathered in the wrong order. Voices drew close, one demanding, one answering, both urgent. I heard the fact of their words without taking them in, as if language had been reduced to a set of decisions happening in a room adjacent to mine. I tested my hands and found the floor. The impulse to sit up was strong enough to feel like instinct, but my body refused to believe me. Then the hallway changed shape again, shoes stopping. A command cut through the air, an authority that made the room smaller and safer at the same time. Light flooded my face. A woman knelt, uniform, badge, focus so steady that it stabilized my breathing. "You're okay," she said, voice low and exact. "Stay still. Ambulance is on the way." Her tone did not allow doubt to contribute. The scene completed itself around us with the speed of people who had rehearsed for this without wanting to. Movement in the hallway, hands securing wrists, someone protesting with words that no longer mattered. A second officer scanned the shelves and the corners like the building itself might be concealing a verdict. The woman asked my name and whether I could follow her finger with my eyes. I did. I asked about my phone, my wallet. She said they were accounted for. She said variations of "you're safe now" until the sentence reached my bones. Hospitals reorganize fear into paperwork. I lay behind a curtain while a nurse checked the place where an object had introduced itself to my skull. The doctor asked the right questions and watched my pupils like they were answering on my behalf. Somewhere between vitals and release forms. A detective stopped by to explain, calmly, almost apologetically, what they believed was happening inside that building and others like it. Fake listings, meet-ups staged just far enough from comfort that you accept the terms before you register the cost. Lure, isolate, take everything you can carry. The department had been watching the area after a tip from across the river about similar setups. Timing, he said, was the reason I was telling this story and not the evening news. When I was steady enough to leave, an officer brought me my wallet and phone in a small plastic tray that made the items look like they had been on trial and acquitted. Then he lifted a larger evidence bag from the chair at the foot of the bed, and inside it, sealed and improbable, was the lamp. "We'll need to clear it," he said. as if talking about the weather. Then it's yours, if you still want it. Want is a word that, once broken, doesn't repair neatly. It's a lamp, I told myself, not a symbol. A few days later, bandaged and moving like I was learning my own weight again. I carried the evidence bag across our living room while Javi watched from the couch with a grin he didn't bother to hide. "We're keeping it," he said, as if I had asked. "It's a trophy now." He cut the seal carefully, lifted the lamp with both hands, set it on the floor near the couch, and pressed the switch. Light unfurled into the room, generous and steady, and the apartment learned a new shape. The rug had colors we hadn't seen. The books on the shelf stopped pretending to be shadows. For a few minutes, we stood in a silence that was not empty, but full. "Best $20 we never spent," Javi said. "Best light we ever had," I answered, because both sentences could be true. That night, I paid bills with clarity and found my socks without a search party. I poured water without missing the glass. The lamp threw a field of reassurance across the furniture and held it there as if good light were a promise you could redeem whenever you needed it. But every time I looked at the marble base, my head remembered the distance between a safe decision and a foolish one. The glow didn't erase the hallway, or the closet, or the fact that the lamp had entered our lives through a door that should have remained closed. It illuminated the room and, with a smaller, quieter insistence, illuminated the part of me that would wake at 3 a.m. and see the shape of a stranger at the end of a corridor that no longer existed. "You're okay," the officer had said. The sentence was true. It was also incomplete. Safety is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is what a story has to learn to carry. Good light doesn't erase the room you got it from. It just lets you see the room you're in. The call from the precinct came 2 days later. Property cleared. I signed the voucher at a metal desk whose surface reflected me as a smudged oval. Then waited while the clerk disappeared into a cage of labeled shelves. He returned with the lamp sealed inside a new bag, the kind that makes everything look clinical, even when it isn't. He gave me a receipt with the kind of carbon copy that never truly copies enough, and said I could go. Outside. The air had shed winter's last posture, but hadn't yet learned how to be warm. I carried the bag like it weighed more than it did. Cautious, the way you are with something that requires a story to explain. At home. Javi cleared a space near the couch with a ceremony that made me laugh in spite of myself. He set the lamp down, stepped back, and appraised it like a painting that might improve the wall behind it just by existing. We moved furniture a few inches at a time until the room agreed with itself. When we finally plugged it in and let the switch do its uncomplicated work, the apartment expanded, edges sharpened. The corners stopped auditioning as hiding places. We could read without leaning toward the page. We could talk without feeling like we were whispering to an audience of shadows. Javi called it an upgrade. I called it a reprieve. Still, the lamp carried its previous address. I could see the hallway in the way the light fell across the floor, the closet in the angle of the metal neck, the evidence room in the way the marble base anchored itself, as if the wood beneath were a dock, and the lamp a small, immovable boat. That night, we made dinner and ate in the kind of silence that happens when both people are grateful for the same ordinary thing. After, Javi opened his laptop and searched for stronger bulbs and safer outlets. A practical liturgy he recites whenever life reminds him he loves me. I texted my mother a photo of the room with the lamp turned on. She sent back a heart and a sentence about how good it felt to see the place bright. I didn't send a second photo of the evidence receipt curled on the coffee table, like a warning folded into a blessing. Before bed, I stood in the doorway and watched the lamp from the hall. I tried to see it as only a lamp, not a conclusion to a night I would rather not rename. I told myself that objects can't hold what we project onto them. The marble base had a faint scratch I hadn't noticed at the hospital, a crescent thin as eyelash. I traced it with my eyes and decided not to imagine where it came from. Some decisions aren't choices. They're stitches you place, and hope will hold. Healing is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to set fear down and reach for it only when you need to remember the lesson. Day by day, the apartment taught itself brighter habits. I found bills on the first try. I underlined book pages without angling the paper toward the window. Late nights in the copy shop felt less like exile when I knew the living room could receive me as a place instead of a shadow. Yet the story wouldn't file itself properly. When the building settled at 3 a.m, a brief redistribution of weight through beams and pipes, my body prepared for footsteps in a hallway that wasn't ours. When the radiator exhaled the way old radiators do, I pictured a door I hadn't locked in a district I didn't live in anymore. I set new rules. No more solo pickups, not even for bargains that glitter with practicality. Meet in bright places. In daylight, bring Javi or don't go. The rules didn't make me fearless. They made my fear useful. On a Friday, the detective called to say the case might produce charges beyond simple theft. He didn't promise outcomes. He offered process. He asked if I needed a referral for victim services. I said yes. Then told him about the lamp in our living room, how it had become the strangest kind of prize. He said objects are poor accomplices to memory, but excellent accomplices to recovery. Let it make your life easier, he said. Let the rest be ours. I took the advice and tried to let it be a household thing. We stacked 2 books under the base to hide a wobble that didn't exist. We angled the neck toward the couch, then toward the desk, then split the difference. We learned the precise hour when the bulb warmed the swan wall, enough to suggest afternoon, even after midnight. Javi started calling it the sun we rent. Sometimes I caught myself smiling at that. Other times I caught myself staring at the base as if it were a map I hadn't finished reading. The mark that looked like an eyelash on marble didn't fade or deepen. It simply kept existing, which is its own kind of insistence. I told the story to a counselor who listened the way a good reader does, attending to structure as much as plot. She said the goal wasn't to forget, but to remember without reenacting. She asked what the lamp meant. I said it made the room functional and made me honest about the cost of that function. She nodded, as if I had answered a riddle correctly. That night, I fell asleep with the light off and the door open, a configuration that had felt impossible a week earlier. The apartment didn't change. The light didn't change. What changed was the amount of space I allowed my fear to occupy. It still had a room. It just didn't have the lease. Some trophies are not for winning. They are for instructing. Weeks later, I stopped framing the lamp as proof that I survived a particular hallway and began framing it as proof that precautions are love translated into practice. I brought home a surge protector with a reset I would probably never use. Javi printed a checklist we kept near the door. Share location. Public meetups only. Trust the sentence that says, "Leave now." Friends came over and complimented the light. We said thank you and did not explain. The story felt complete without being told. On a slow Sunday, I sat on the couch and watched the lamp do nothing more than its job. The room held still in the way rooms do when no one asks anything unnecessary of them. The marble circled itself the way stone does when it has nothing to prove. I thought about how accidents of timing can become boundaries you enforce for the rest of your life. If the detective's call had come 10 minutes later that day, a detail we'll never quantify might be the detail we'd never escape. I thought about the seller's username, those impersonal letters and numbers. and decided it didn't matter anymore. Accountability will either find its way through the system or it won't. My part is the set of choices that keep me whole. The lamp worked perfectly. It cast a warm, constant field that made our small apartment generous. By every metric that matters to a person who has to live in a place, it was a success. I would have been thrilled if not for the way memory insists on holding its shape every time I looked at it. I also saw an industrial corridor and a closet where someone waited for the right moment to exchange one future for another. That is not a failure of light. That is the accuracy of it. Safety is not a finish line. It is an everyday practice. As ordinary as pressing a switch and as deliberate as choosing where to stand. If you're reading this and measuring your own bargain between need and risk, hear me clearly. You can want what makes your life easier and still refuse the price that makes your life smaller. I keep the lamp because it keeps us from stumbling, and because it reminds me not to stumble where I don't have to. It's both. And that bothness is how I move forward. Druze. Nights in deep woods don't announce danger. They negotiate it with you. One small decision at a time. Where to pitch the tent. How far the trees lean in. How much darkness you decide to ignore. Last summer. Mark. Jason. And I took a 3-night trip into a state park a few hours from home. Not the kind with gift shops and paved loops, primitive sights, no cell signal. A ring of stones for heat and light, and the tacit agreement that whatever you brought was all you'd have. We arrived late afternoon, put canvas to ground, tightened guy lines until they thrummed, stacked kindling, and fed a small, controlled column of warmth. The first night belonged to routine. We cooked simply, watched the sky dilute from blue to charcoal, and kept conversation easy. No other campers, no distant music, no headlights winking through the trees, just our triangle of tents. A small flame contained by rock, and the conviction that we had chosen the right place for the kind of rest you can't buy in a city. I told myself that isolation was the point. I meant it. Still, habits followed me. Where are the exits if there were such things in a forest? What angle of slope runs away from rain? How far the light throws before it surrenders? Morning affirmed our choice. Cool air. A sky without obligation. Coffee that tasted better for requiring effort. We hiked. We cast lines into water that kept its secrets. We traced a ridge to a view that made us quiet for a reason none of us named. The day wrote evidence that we were alone. By the second evening, That solitude felt less like a gift and more like a contract with clauses we hadn't read closely enough. The trees seemed to incline toward us. When we spoke, we ended sentences early, like men not wanting to owe the dark a reply. We were back at the ring by early night, not late, and told the stories men tell when they are away from anyone who could correct them. Half victories from work, half memories from school, a few confessions disguised as jokes. Jason cut himself off mid-sentence, face turned slightly, as if a string in the dark had tugged it. Did you hear that? Mark and I waited, breathing the same measured breath people default to when listening becomes work. The forest gave us nothing at first. Then it offered a pattern organized across distance, too spaced to be small life, too patient to be wind. Mark argued for deer. We nodded because agreement makes men feel safer than truth. We joked because pretending to be unafraid can keep you from noticing that you are. Eventually, we closed zippers and lay down. Sleep came like a negotiation too. Conditional, easily revoked. I learned how thin nylon becomes as a boundary once the mind decides to measure it. Some anxieties do not speak. They lean. Daylight returned with movement in the canopy, and a light filtered, as if it had been coached to be kind. We took the same trails and found different meanings. Jason kept glancing over his shoulder without admitting it. Mark lengthened his stride, as if to assert authority over terrain. I pretended not to notice either of them, and found myself inventorying sounds. Water against stone, branches shifting against one another. Our own footfalls arranged into a pace that was more about keeping time than covering distance. We ate by mid-afternoon and took a short nap that felt like a compromise. The sky held a light haze that softened edges. Somewhere far off, a bird called and received no reply. I tried my phone out of habit, even though I knew the screen would show nothing. It did. The absence wasn't just signal. It was the realization that we weren't attached to any grid that would notice if we failed to come back on schedule. That truth is usually part of the appeal. On that day, it read like small print. By evening, we built the flame larger, the way people in stories do when they want the dark to negotiate on different terms. The logs settled, and the column of warmth lifted. We spoke in lower voices without deciding to. Mark prodded the embers like he could persuade them to draw a perimeter. The light gave us permission to believe in its boundary, and we accepted it because all three of us preferred that belief to whatever waited beyond it. We told ourselves we were prepared. We weren't reckless. Food sealed, sight cleaned, trails noted. a whistle in my pocket I had never used and did not intend to. We tried to turn the evening into a copy of the first night and discovered that copies degrade at precisely the places you most need them to hold. When it was time to sleep, I chose my position near the flap and rehearsed the small choreography. Headlamp within reach, shoes open, jacket at my feet, knife where my hand would naturally fall. Count your breaths. Count to 4 on the inhale, 6 on the exhale. Keep your body quiet. Keep your attention wide. The forest settled into an absence again, the kind that is not peace so much as potential. Sometime after midnight, awareness arrived before thought. I was awake and could not name the reason other than the human animal's old inheritance. Something in the environment has changed. I stayed still and waited for data. Outside the tent, beyond where the last memory of warmth had faded, weight met ground in a measured pattern, paused, and met ground again. Not close, not far, just where the light would have stopped if it had still been burning. No air moving, no small life performing usual industry. The forest had stepped back from itself. The movement completed a partial circle and then re-established it from another angle, as if learning us by circumference. I heard Mark's breath align with my own in the neighboring tent, no longer the slow rhythm of rest. Jason didn't move, and that felt less like boldness than the stillness people adopt when denial has run out of road. My mind offered scripts. Call out, unzip, shine, confront. My body rejected each for reasons so old they might be carved into bone. I held still and let attention draw a map. Do not invite a face to be inches from yours. Do not give up the cover the tent gives, flimsy as it is. Do not answer a presence with your name. The pattern continued, measured contact with earth. A pause that acknowledged the pause inside us. Then repetition, repositioned. I felt the shape of a path being drawn around our small camp, the way a compass draws a circle, steady, exact, disinterested in how we felt about it. Time lost its units. I counted heartbeats and then stopped because the counting produced its own panic. I replaced the count with inventory, location of the knife, location of the lamp, distance between zipper and the color of air beyond it. I noticed how fear tried to draft a face out of darkness, tried to supply eyes, tried to write a mouth that would be too near if I looked. Our tents were slight bulges in a field of humus. The presence outside had decided to walk its course around them with a patience that did not belong to an animal looking for food. At some point, the perimeter went quiet, not the relief of a solved problem, more like the interval when a question stops being asked aloud and waits to see if you answer anyway. I waited beyond reason. I slept only because the body insists on its taxes eventually. Sunlight can be an apology or a verdict. It found us through the nylon and folded us upright. For a long second, I considered the possibility that I had stayed the whole night in memory. Exhaustion, pretending to be caution. Caution, pretending to be a story. Mark and Jason were already outside. Faces that held the look of men who had not rested even when their bodies were horizontal. We didn't ask how we were. Asking would have forced claims none of us could defend. We began to break down the site with the haste of people who have remembered an appointment elsewhere. Stakes out, lines coiled, canvas folded. Jason stopped mid-direction, eyes fixed on the ground, just beyond where my sleeping bag had been. He pointed. It needed no discussion. The soil held a record written in pressure and shape. Impressions deep enough to show toes. Heels. The arch. Not ours. The size and angles said so. The ring traced by those impressions circled the tents with patient geometry and crossed itself in two places, as if whomever, or whatever, had redrawn its own path to verify it. Bare feet, cold earth. A route designed less for approach than for learning. Distance, angles, reaction. My mouth wanted to generate explanations, insane language. A lost hiker. A prank. Someone who misjudged how far the road was. Each explanation collapsed under the weight of the details. Mark let out a single word that did not help, and then exhaled like paying a bill. Jason crouched to measure with his hand, and then, as if embarrassed by the seriousness of the act, stood without speaking. We took photographs we would never show. We did not debate whether to stay the last night. Contracts can be terminated early. We terminated this one. The hike back to the car was efficient and nearly wordless. Eye contact rationed. The trail that had felt like an invitation now resembled a hallway we were eager to exit. At the parking area, a single other vehicle sat untouched by dust. A reminder that people move through these places without incident all the time. That fact comforted me in theory, and not at all in practice. We didn't report it at the office because we couldn't furnish names or outcomes, only a record in the ground and a chorus of instincts none of us wanted to perform for a stranger behind a counter. Back home, the group chat filled with other subjects. Quickly, work, a trade, a link, and then settled into the second kind of quiet people adopt when they agree not to ask for a second telling of a night that already has one. But the body kept its minutes for a month. when I slept. I slept near edges, doorways, windows, paths to exits. I developed a checklist that didn't need typing. Zippers position, cookware stowed, shoes ready, lamp with fresh batteries, knife accessible but not a talisman. When I ran at dusk, I caught myself assigning percentages to shadows, a private math for risk that balances only the ledger, that tracks whether you come home. Pattern interruption isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's only the absence of crickets. I noticed the moments when environments go quiet in a way that is not rest, but suspension. Grocery store at closing, office floor after cleaning, crews leave, an elevator vestibule when doors have just sealed. Human places can mimic the woods. The same lesson travels between them. Listen for movement that is not random. Respect the line where light stops. Decide in advance what you will do at that line. When friends asked about the trip, I gave them the postcard version. Trails, water, clean air. If their faces held enough curiosity, I added, we cut it a day short. If they pressed, I said. Long story. In truth, it is concise. What complicates it isn't length, but the refusal of a satisfying anything. No capture, no explanation, no rule broken that we can vow never to break again. Only the knowledge that someone walked those circles with bare feet and intent while we lay inside thin fabric, pretending to be walls. I still like the woods. I still go. I haven't sworn off tents or long drives that end where maps show green. But I treat the boundary differently now, as if it were a tool rather than a comfort. I build heat modestly and keep fuel organized. I choose sites with sight lines that allow me to see a path approach rather than merely feel it. I place shoes and light where reach is automatic. Most importantly, I attend to the quiet. Notice the moment when the background pauses. Notice your breath when it listens more than it moves. Keep your body still until your choices are clear. Sometimes, late, I replay that ring in the dirt. I ask myself whether we would have been safer if we had called out, if we had introduced noise into a night curated for listening. I doubt it. The presence wanted information, not conversation. The ring says so. The patience, the restraint, the decision not to cross the last few feet even once. Not mercy, not kindness. Restraint as method. Jason and Mark don't bring it up. And I don't either. Because friendship benefits from leaving certain doors closed. But when Jason texts about another trip, I'll say yes with conditions. I'll say, Pick a site near a ranger road, I'll say. Let's bring an extra light, not for drama, for truth. I'll say, if the forest leans, we pay attention. Some nights do not end when you leave them. They end when you learn their terms. We honored that night by leaving. I honor it now by remembering what it taught without dressing it as legend. Where the firelight ended, something measured us and decided we were enough for the moment. That is the kind of knowledge you cannot return for a refund. You carry it forward and let it teach you how to keep your circle honest, warm, and awake. He didn't come to see anyone. He came to be seen by the building. I'd been a security guard for 5 years, long enough to know most nights are made of routine, fluorescent ceilings, and the kind of paperwork that keeps a pulse without ever raising it. Our building is a modest downtown block, a glass entrance that catches every street reflection, 2 floors of cubicles and conference rooms, kitchenettes where coffee turns mean by dinner time, all leased to a tech startup that treats Friday evenings like a holiday. By 11:30, the monitors in front of me offered quiet in grayscale. A few parked cars, an empty lobby, automatic lights doing exactly what they were told. Then, one exterior camera showed a man standing 10 feet from the main doors, not pacing, not scrolling a phone, not even glancing around, simply occupying a rectangle of night as if it belonged to him. Hood up, hands in jacket pockets, head tipped a fraction toward the glass as though the building were speaking to him under its breath. I ran through the rational list. An employee waiting for a ride, a lost delivery driver, a neighbor cutting through. This is a city of detours. 5 minutes passed. Nothing changed. Another bath. No motion at all. Not even the shift people make when they forget they're being watched and settle into their own bodies. I toggled angles to see him from the side, then from the doorway's reflection. And he was exactly where he'd been, as if the sidewalk had memorized him. That kind of stillness is never neutral. I took the elevator down, crossed the lobby, and cracked the door enough to speak through the gap. You good? Are you waiting for someone? No answer. Not a nod. Not a glance at me. His gaze stayed on the building itself, like the glass had said something that required repeating. Every training I've ever had threaded itself through that narrow opening. Do not step outside. Control your distance. Keep the barrier intact. The urge to be helpful is a muscle. The urge to stay alive is a command. I locked the door, walked back, and told myself this was simple. A confused night person gathering himself. I returned to the control room and swept the feeds again. The space where he had been was empty. No transition on the adjacent angles. No trace on the parking lot view. Nothing to suggest which direction he had chosen. He wasn't there, and he had not gone anywhere I could prove. Simple isn't finished just because you want it to be. A half-hour later, a camera on the upper corridor registered motion between the kitchenette and the corner offices. Friday nights empty out early. Anyone staying signs the late occupancy sheet. Tonight's sheet was blank. The resolution isn't generous, but posture is its own language. And this posture matched what I'd seen at the glass. Hood up, shoulders slightly forward, a way of walking that reserves effort, as if time were an ally, not something to outrun. The doors are secured at 10 Asukolor, card access only. I had locked the lobby myself. I watched him cross the frame and disappear into an angle the camera couldn't reach. No panic, no apparent struggle with the badge readers, no fumbling at doorknobs, just a slow confidence that said he knew the map and the blind spots. I took the stairs 2 at a time and kept my light down. The hallway above was a study in emptiness. Screensavers, dark glass, a few desk plants, like proof that people intended to return Monday. I cleared offices, break rooms, the copy room. Nothing. Down the length of the corridor, a side door near the emergency exit sat imperfectly flush, as if air had rearranged it. That door links to a stairwell we insist stays closed. Any unbadged open should trigger an alarm. There had been no alarm. I angled the door with the end of my flashlight and found the reason. On the frame, a thin strip of black electrical tape masked the latch, a simple, practiced trick. Keep the door from catching, so entry becomes a quiet arrangement instead of a conversation. The tape was smooth, freshly pressed, placed by someone who knows half measures curl and fail. Someone had walked through here, expecting to walk back out. Waiting is work, when the unknown is patient. I radioed the situation and requested officers. Then I sat in the control room and watched the monitors until they felt like they were watching me. No more movement on the upper floor. The street stayed orderly. The parking lot offered blank asphalt and headlights that didn't belong to us. I replayed the corridor footage to make sure I hadn't invented a figure out of loneliness and pixels. He had been there, real enough to interrupt procedure, subtle enough to leave no immediate mess. I've learned not to fill silence with narrative. The story you write to calm yourself is rarely the one unfolding. 2 patrol cars arrived. I let them in, kept the door locked behind them, and showed them the tape. The hallway, the route a person would take if they knew where cameras don't look. We cleared the building together. The officers moved with a pace that wasn't hurry or caution, so much as practiced certainty. Stairwells, restrooms, server closets, every place a person would pick if he had studied the floor plans and wanted to manage risk. The building gave us nothing until one officer pointed out faint smudges along the tile near the maintenance room, marks less like footprints than like the suggestion of them, as if someone heavy had passed when the floor was still almost dry from a mop and the residue had asked to be believed. The maintenance room has no camera. It's a pocket of privacy built years before anyone imagined security as a lattice of lenses. The door was closed, the key untouched on my ring. We opened it together. Lights up, angles covered, and found an empty space with coiled hoses, tool carts, and a smell that never fully leaves concrete. No disturbed dust, no locker ajar, no reason for a person to prefer it except the absence of a lens. The officers did one more pass. Outside, basement, rooftop access. The building returned us to the lobby like nothing had happened. Our report said otherwise. Some exits are more real than entrances. We traced the perimeter again, as if we had missed a door that didn't want to be found. Nothing. The detective asked for my logs and timestamps. I handed over the list. Exterior stillness. Upstairs movement. Taped latch. The not quite footprints. The maintenance room that held no one and everything all at once. He said absence can be evidence when the absence is arranged. They posted a cruiser to loop the block and a unit to idle out front, while I walked the cameras with an officer to check for angles we'd learned to ignore. When patrol left and the building settled, the room felt different. Not haunted, just newly aware of itself. The next day, facilities peeled the tape and checked the alarms. We ran badge audits and found no anomalies. HR confirmed no late workers. IT checked server logs for unusual midnight access and found nothing to attach a name to. Nothing lost, nothing broken, nothing taken. The kind of clean that doesn't soothe. People like to explain this kind of thing with simple stories. Squatter. Thief, spooked by patrol. Someone who misread the building and backed away. Maybe. But none of those accounts explain the stillness in front of the glass, or the way he moved upstairs like he'd already been here enough times to stop making mistakes. I didn't let the speculation grow teeth. I filed the incident, drew a diagram of the latch tape, and wrote myself a note I would later tape to my monitor. Do not open the door to complete a story that isn't finished. Aftermath isn't quiet. It's administrative. Management signed off on new coverage, a wider lens for the upper corridor, a unit aimed at the maintenance room threshold, and mirrored film along the lobby panes that reduces glare and gives us less to misread at night. Friday, overnights, when staffing allows. Now run 2 guards. A building-wide email reminded staff never to prop doors for convenience and to challenge tailgating with courtesy and a request for a badge. We held a training where I explained the tape on the latch and watched a room full of professionals learn how a door gives away more than it keeps if you let it. Some rolled their eyes about paranoia. Most listened because they have laptop screens full of proprietary work, and families who prefer them at the breakfast table. I added habits. I angle my chair toward the feeds I had learned to treat as settled. I keep the radio close enough to touch without looking. I practice a sentence I can say through the door in any voice I need. Identify yourself by name and purpose. And I practice the answer to the urge that sometimes climbs the spine when someone needs help, and you want to be the person who gives it. Stay inside. Control the barrier. Call it in. Make them come to you. The best protocols are short because you must remember them when everything else elongates. Some nights stay because they didn't become disasters. Months later, I still think about the man at the glass, not to make patterns where there aren't any, not to give fear the job of storyteller, just enough to keep my habits sharp. People ask whether I was afraid. I tell them fear is useful data when it's acknowledged, and destructive when it's invited to drive. The scariest part wasn't the tape or the corridor or the maintenance room with nothing to confess. It was how easily ordinary procedure could have been interrupted if I had stepped outside that door because I wanted to be a decent human being. He might have been waiting for a ride, a friend, an apology from the night, or he might have been waiting for me. I will never know. I can live with not knowing. I would rather live with an unanswered question than hand the answer a key. Practice is the opposite of panic. A month after the incident, we ran a Saturday security drill with a skeleton staff. The point wasn't to catch anyone failing. It was to prove the policies live better in muscle than in memos. I mentored Evan, our newest guard. We started in the control room with the feeds paused on an empty frame. I had him name every camera by number and location left to right. Then we unpaused, and I asked him to point out what belonged and what didn't. We staged a scenario. A jacket left just outside the lobby doors. A person in a hood pausing too long by the badge reader. A side door that didn't sit flush. Evan recited steps, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. That is how it starts. Curiosity, then helpfulness, then an unplanned step into the air between two kinds of safety. I had him lock the door and say the sentence out loud to the glass. Identify yourself by name and purpose. It sounded awkward the first time. It sounded like Muscle the Third. We walked the stairwells and the side doors and talked about blind angles and tape that looks like nothing, because nothing is exactly what it wants to be. We set the maintenance room threshold camera and reviewed how the feed looks in low light, so he wouldn't mistake a reflection for a person, or a person for a reflection. At the end, he asked if he'd done well. I told him the truth. I keep for myself. The drill isn't pass or fail. It is practice for remembering that the building is a body. Doors are joints. Cameras are eyes. Policies are the bones we move on. The person who stands at the glass may be a tired neighbor or a test. You don't need to know which before you choose the correct sentence. We ended back in the control room. The frame was empty again. That is the image I prefer. Nothing to fix, nothing to forgive. But I wrote one more note on the whiteboard before I clocked out. The barrier is not an obstacle. It is the tool